Full panel. This is exciting. So everyone, this is our panelists today. We're talking about inclusive climate action. And I'm really honored that I've been able to get to know all of you, and just wanted to start first with a quote that I heard this week, actually. As part of COP, the UN announced this new partnership on gender, and I heard one of the officials saying, we must strengthen inclusive decision-making so that the voices of feminists, youth, indigenous, and other grassroots movements can be heard loud and clear from the local to the global level. I wonder, a question to the group, have we seen that on day 6 of COP? Tokunboh.
Well, I was just saying to you earlier, there have been many panels and forums that have been discussing this, and we've seen lots of announcements. Of course, we want action, and we also want to make sure that gender on the agenda is at the center and not an afterthought. So we have been hearing more. Of course, we know that, especially in my home continent of Africa, the most affected are women when it comes to weather matters, whether that's from economic or gender-based violence consumption across the spectrum and their productive capacity. And so for us, it's at the heart. Us in Africa, us in my firm, Alitheia, it's at the heart of our intentionality to drive for impact.
Maybe just jumping in here. I mean, it's great. It's that you hear a lot about gender, and we have a health day, and fragility day, and gender. Really exciting, but I really don't think we're nearly, it's not enough yet. I mean, if we think people can say, if you remember last year at COP, there were 7 female world leaders of over 100. This year, how many are there? 15.
15.
Oh, they doubled the number of female leaders, 15 out of 115. The 1,000 most recognized scientists, climate scientists, only 12% are women. So that is something we have to recognize. So it's progress. It's not enough. At the World Bank, what's really nice, and the $36 billion that we delivered in climate finance last year, that we do have clear gender tagging, and every single 100% of our investments have to be focused also on inclusion, on women, on voice and accountability. So these are ways to do it. You set targets and you respond to the targets, and I think that's what's really, really important.
Heather, jump in here. I see you nodding.
Yeah, so at the Climate Justice Resilience Fund, one of the major things that we do is support women and youth and indigenous peoples in building their own solutions for climate, and then using those solutions from the ground up to influence their own governments, to come here to this global space and make their voices heard. And obviously, it's not to the point that we need it to be yet, but it is growing, and there's more and more diversity, and there's really important perspectives that are starting to come through.
And part of that, Meher, I wanted you to jump in because you take a look at the data. I mean, can you give us some context as to why this is so important to be at the table?
Yes, I think we've already talked about it. I've been hearing data a lot in these last few days at different places and how important it is. And I look at it in terms of both quantitative data and qualitative. And although in quantitative we do need the figures because that's important, and the targets and the figures, but it's the qualitative data that I focus on a lot in terms of the perception of women, their experiences, their stories, and how they interact with nature and the natural resources. And women's roles within that, within the family, within the household, because women are primarily responsible for fuel, for water, for fodder, for looking after the livestock, for forests, for providing it. And it's then women who have the greatest impact of environment, who feel the greatest impact of environmental degradation and now climate change. And so therefore they spend so much more time searching for water, for fodder, and looking for food for their families. So getting those perceptions, women's experiences through research, through data collection, and how that can inform us and in policies and in planning. And I think that is what is important. So even though it is being done, and I know there have been a lot of forums and sessions over here at COP as well, in terms of data, I think there's much more that we need to understand at the local level.
Well, can you talk about that a little bit more? I mean, what are some of the solutions that you've heard that maybe move us a little bit forward in terms of progress?
In terms of progress, I think some of the things that have emerged are the climate change gender action plans, which have been made by various countries, and it is an IUCN-led initiative, which I think started in 2010. A number of countries, Tanzania, Egypt, etc., have done it. Pakistan, the country that I'm from, has also got the climate change gender action plan, which was launched last year. It's aligned to the climate change policy, and again, it was a series of consultations where they spoke to women at different levels, local, national, and brought in perceptions of the people, and men and women. And that then has sort of brought out a strategy and a framework which we can then use to advance gender inclusion in climate solutions. So that is one of the steps.
Tokunboh?
Yeah, if I can come in there, because just double clicking on what the two of them said there, is that in terms of what's going on, we want to move away from female as victims and more into the woman as a productive contributor, both on the innovation side, on the financing side. We need to see more asset allocators. It's said when you have female asset allocators at the table, there's more concentration on the environmental, social, and even better governance. So we need to see more of that. And then just in terms of the creativity, we need to be spotlighting more of those solutions that are coming from the ground up, from women that understand what it is we need. In Africa, for example, we look at cooking, we look at powering the households, we look at transport. Who's the person making the purchasing decision on those three? And who's impacted, for example, if you're cooking with firewood the most? The woman and her child. So the innovations that we're seeing coming up need to have them at the center, and we need to see more asset allocation that's thinking intentionally around these solutions that they're coming up with.
Has some of that been a part of any of the discussions that you've had thus far?
I've had to bring them into the room, to be honest, in some cases, and indeed, in many cases, I go to some of these side events and I hear the word global, and there isn't anyone that looks like me on the stage, and then I wonder, where does global stop? Which is a travesty, given that by 2050, most of the young population is going to be based in Africa, and we need to be thinking ahead for the solutions for them. And that is not just because it's a moral obligation, it's also economic imperative, and also just in terms of global stability, because otherwise we're going to have the migration that moves people from these countries that we're talking about that are heavily affected but haven't had the solutions and the capital to resolve their problems around the climate action.
Heather, did you want to jump in?
Well, I wanted to pick up on this idea of asset allocation. I work in philanthropy, so it's a different type of asset, different type of allocation, but we are moving in a direction of participatory approaches to grant making, where we're finding methods where women or young people or other groups can be the ones deciding where the money goes instead of a group of rich people who have the money. So it's a really exciting shift.
Yeah.
I'd like to just build on both of those points. I mean, one is we have the advantage. I've been in a lot of events as well, like you say, and the stage doesn't look like what we really want it to look like, but we also in our pavilion are doing our own programming, which is great because we can bring people and, that we could choose who's on stage. And so we had a really nice event on the Forest Carbon Partnership, and we were able to bring Indigenous people and voices, male and female, from around the world, and it was really, really, if you put them on stage and let them say, this is how we want to do benefit sharing. This is how, when we want to design, just the 2 points there, we want to design the benefit sharing in this way. We don't want, maybe sometimes we want money or sometimes we want land. We want other things, we want tractors, whatever. So designing that and giving legal rights and legal ownership is really, really important. So I just want to agree with both of those. And if I could just one last anecdote, that one of the female Indigenous leaders who was at our pavilion, I asked her to moderate the session, and she was so nervous. And I said, why? You're amazing. You've already spoken so well publicly. And she did an amazing job. And afterwards, she came up to me and said, thank you so much, thank you so much. And I think we really need to incentivize, empower people. All the women are shaking their heads, and this is our job, to make them feel comfortable, bring them in the front of the room, let them speak, put them on stage, young people, diverse people. And I think that's something that I think everyone's nodding.
Yeah.
That's something we really want to do. So
Absolutely.
What does that look like then from the other side? Because as you mentioned, 7 female leaders last year, 15 this year. Is that what you said? Was it the correct
that's what this is.
Yeah, so the stats are not too high, right? So there needs to be a little bit of movement from, you know, other people. So what does that look like? I mean, how would you hopefully want to see people encourage more women, more indigenous groups to come to the table?
Well, I think that how do we do that? How do we get voice, right? So I think it's not just having numbers of how many people there, because now there's a lot of times people have quotas. We have our gender strategy, inclusion strategies, but how do you actually make it meaningful voice and leadership? So I think it's building up the confidence, so showcasing, role modeling, female leadership or other inclusive leadership, but also supporting them. I think this mentoring is very, very important. We can't. We always talk about the old boys club. I feel it all the time. I don't know if you ever feel it. A lot of time in a meeting, I will speak. I'm loud, but I'm not loud enough because men often repeat what I'm saying, and then the conversation moves forward. So I think trying to help ourselves and share these experiences is really, really.
If I can just also say, there needs to be intentionality from top down and intentionality from bottom up. So many of us, we come here not necessarily through our countries convening the conversation around what is the work you're doing on the ground, how can we spotlight that so that we can show solutions and think about how we convene capital towards amplifying those solutions. But also bottom up, we need to be more proactive in terms of spotlighting what's happening within our backyards, some of our investments. We like to talk about that. We talk about our Clean Cook Stores investments. I'm also a trustee on something called the Earthshot Prize, which intentionally goes out looking for, looking for eco-innovators wherever they are in the world. We scurry them out. We look for local nominators to bring them to the table so that we can amplify their solutions, think about scaling them up, and think about replicating their solutions, because oftentimes they are local, on-the-ground solutions that are locally relevant. And so we think about how can we find them. We give them some prize money, but that's just by the by. What's more important is that amplification and that empowerment, that encouragement to scale their solutions and connecting them with business and philanthropy dollars and mentorship that can help them scale.
I'd like to just add that in terms of what you just mentioned, in terms of bringing women in, we have to give them the skills as well. Give them the tools to empower them, to speak, to come in, to give them the knowledge, give them the enabling environment so that they can come forward and speak, and bring them into participatory processes, give them decision-making positions, bring them as part of that into the process so that then they can be included. And right from the beginning, it can't be a tag-on, it can't be something that comes in at a later stage. It has to be, you have to believe that women are important and they have to be there right from the start. And because their needs are different, their perceptions are different, their strategies are different, so we have to then respond to that accordingly. And it's different in different communities, different parts of the world, all over the globe. So you have to focus on at the local level that what is it that women really need, what are they saying, what are their stories, what do they need, and respond to that, and then bring them in to the discussions and the dialogues.
What was seen, I think, as an early win during COP, of course, was the loss and damage agreement, the fund agreement, especially when we talk about global north and global south, and advancing or supporting these communities that are most affected by it. Heather, did it go far enough? I mean, what's your assessment of sort of what was agreed upon now?
Well, I mean, this is a really good milestone, the creation of the fund, and some immediate pledges to the fund, including a pledge. The first pledge wasn't from one of the Annex 1 countries. There's some unprecedented things here that are really positive, but it's really about implementation. There's a long ways to go before that fund is stood up and able to deliver funding. We've been pioneering some work on community-led measures to address loss and damage, and there's some great examples out there of how you can really put the funding in the hands of people who are experiencing climate change right now, and address their needs and get it going really quickly.
Can you share one of those with us?
Well, one of the examples I was thinking of actually, we convened a youth loss and damage funding council, and as kind of a pilot of a group of about 15 young people from around the world who had been advocating on loss and damage and fought really hard for this fund that's created. But we created a council where they deployed a bunch of funding. They processed something like 500 applications from around the world in the course of just a few months, and they delivered $10,000 grants and a $50,000 grant, and then they immediately started a process of learning from the experience of what it meant to do that grant making, and they're now ready to, they just did actually announce the next call for proposals, and we have another 250,000 that they'll deploy in the next few months. So it's just an example of what you were talking about of new mechanisms change at the top in terms of how the money flows. And we're really hoping this can be an example for the World Bank and for the others responsible for the new fund.
Jennifer, do you want to respond?
Well, yeah, we're absolutely delighted to see the Loss and Damage Fund. I mean, from COP 27 to now, that was actually launched, and it's the first time a decision was made at the beginning of COP, which is amazing. And the funding's coming in. I think there's more than $700 million. The World Bank has been invited to serve as a trustee and a host of the fund. We're actually delighted to do that and available to make it move as fast as possible. That's really important. But we need to recognize this is a fund that has a board. The next step is for a board to be set up for UNFCCC, the countries, the member countries, to just nominate the board. We hope the board will be very diverse, inclusive. And then there's going to be a secretariat, so when they hire staff to run this, that's going to also include the diversity. So I think that's really important. So that's the fund itself. There's a lot of rules of the game, who's eligible, who's not, slow onset, what do you do with slow onset, and rapid response. Big countries, small countries, that's important.
Yeah.
But can I just come back, that loss and damage is not just this fund. What we need to do now, and all of us are working together, is really to help countries already. They have to climate development has to go hand in hand, build resilience, build adaptation, but there's a lot of efforts on early warning systems, and you talk about data, hydromet data, make farmers can have access to data. And I have this great example from Vietnam where we actually built schools, the roofs of the schools actually serve, they get flooded all the time in the Mekong Delta. And so when there's floods, that the communities can go in as a safety place up on the roofs of the schools. And then there, you really need women to come and help design that. But another thing we learned is that it's really tragic. Kids die because they don't know how to swim. The floods come, the canals flood.
Yes, that's right.
And then the boys were learning how to swim, not the girls. So the most effective program we actually did was teaching girls how to swim. And then later on, we documented, came back and saved lives. So these are the types of things that are really important for us to think about.
Heather, or Tokunboh, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think it's great. It was a great start at COP to have the announcement at initially 400 million. I think it's something like 700 million now. And I think it's a good first step. I think that does help address some of the past, because again, by definition, loss and damage, which has happened in the past. But climate adaptation finance, Nigeria needs, there's a stat that says we need at least 100 billion between now and 2030, perhaps annually. So $100 billion, 700 million for the whole developing world. There's a gap. So we need to see more intentionality around the climate finance for adaptation. We need to see development and amplification of carbon markets, adequate carbon pricing. And again, we need to not just see the developing world as just a cost sink, but also, given our nature and given the basins that we have, some of which are larger than the Amazon forest, in the Congo, some in Nigeria, those need to be brought to the table as contributors for solutions. And we need to get good carbon pricing that enables us to receive some of that value, which can then in turn be put into other climate adaptation products and other financing. So it's a great past. We need to look forward, and we need to see continents like Africa not just as a victim receiving, but also for us contributing, because we can, with our carbon sequestration in those forests, we can contribute significantly to the solutions.
Heather?
I mean, I fully agree. The need is huge, and the amount of finance and the need for creativity is immense. I want to caution a little bit around the carbon pricing. We work with communities that are really being run roughshod right now by carbon projects that are not acknowledging their land rights and not educating the the people. If you're a farmer or a herder and you've got other things to do than understand carbon credits. And so people don't know what it means to set up these projects, and they may not even realize what component of their assets they're signing off to a project, or they may not be in a position to really have an equitable distribution of the benefits.
Yes.
And so these equity issues, these inclusion issues in the carbon markets are really huge. And I work with more and more activists who are really skeptical,
I fully agree, and it has to be with integrity, it has to be with community engagement, and we're working on some projects where it really does start with the education of the community and shared ownership. So, but even when you do that, where are those carbon credits going to be sold?
Yeah.
And at good value, just value.
And Jennifer, I'd love for you to jump in, because I know the World Bank really is pushing this.
Well, we've been working for the last 20 years on high integrity forestry carbon markets, starting with the REDD+, but then the FCPF. And what we've brought, we're working in over 40 countries, but 15 countries we've worked for many, many years to look and make sure these are high integrity credits, third parties looking at them, and high, what does that mean? High environmental sustainability, but even more important, the social sustainability.
Absolutely.
Where you have the benefit sharing, where you have the community engaged, indigenous people, land rights. And this is really important. So basically at COP, what we've done is supporting these countries, the communities and the countries, for jurisdictional programs where it's clear there's additionality in these credits. They're verified, they're measured. And then countries can then decide, do we want to keep these credits for our own nationally determined contributions, or is this something we would actually like to have participate in the voluntary carbon markets? And if so, then how do we make sure that whatever price we do get, it does go back to communities? And here we have more than 80% of all the benefits going back to the communities. It's taken a long, long, long time to develop this, but we now have 15 countries coming online. This can represent hundreds of millions of credits and billions of dollars potentially. So I think that's what's important, is to maintain that integrity. There's definitely a lot of greenwashing, bad integrity all around, but let's look at what is working, let's protect that and highlight that and have other people emulate that. And that's what we really want to put forward.
Absolutely.
Meher, I'd love for you to weigh in, especially when we think about the policy decisions in the text that potentially we hear at the end of COP28. Can you talk to us about maybe where there's still gaps that need to be filled?
I think the gaps are basically to try and close the gender gap, to sort of look at where, what is missing, and how can we sort of reduce that in terms of how we can include, where we can include women in these processes, and how does one include them in terms of what you talk about finance, gender budgeting, gender responsive budgeting, in terms of projects and programs. So when you design a program and you design a project, to ensure that a certain amount is allocated specifically for women, or for women's projects, or for women's after solutions, which can, like fuel efficient stoves, solar powers, etc. Things that at the local level can make life easier for women, those who are in rural communities. So I think that is where we really need to sort of focus. Those are the gaps. So even though we have a lot, we have moved far, and a lot of progress has been made, we need to keep going back to, well, how is that affecting the communities? Where is it really helping? How are we empowering these women? And how are they then adapting, or how is it really reaching them to make a difference in their livelihoods, in their lives? I know Tokunboh mentioned migration. and climate migration, and how, I mean, that's a gap which I think we need a lot more information on, a lot more in terms of both qualitative and quantitative data, and to see how is that affecting women. Because I know in some parts I've heard, I mean, I've read about, is that female-headed households are being left behind because the men are migrating. So how is that impacting women? What does that really mean for them, to their daily life, to their livelihoods? How are they dealing with that? How are they coping with that? And what kind of support system can we then provide them to be able to combat the changes that they're facing in climate? Because they're really in the forefront. Women are in the forefront of climate change, which is why we say climate change is not gender neutral, and that women are impacted more than most others.
Do you potentially, all of you potentially see tech or AI, because there's a lot of discussion around AI, I see Heather, she looks skeptical over there, potentially benefiting. I mean, there's people on both sides of this, right? In terms of getting more inclusive policy decisions in the climate discussion. I mean, does AI help? Tokunboh?
Well, tech in general, and AI means many things, so I don't want to just go just into AI, and we need to think about digital in general. But if I look at weather intelligent systems that are being used in some of our local communities on farms that are helping for the warning signs, also for farmers, helping them to know when to plan their planting season, but also price discovery on their products, when to get them to market. And so, you know, there's a significant amount of data that needs to be crunched. And it is the technologies like AI that are going to enable us to get the right kinds of insights and therefore advise properly on the ground local communities. And that really ends up in the palm of a farmer's hand or a woman, small scale holder farmer. And so the technology that enables us to bring all that big data and all the insights and intelligence, science and technology in a locally relevant manner to the person on the ground, the farmer, the small scale holder farmer, the woman at home, that is important, and that needs to be developed. And it's already happening. We're going to need to see an amplification of that, because weather warning systems are important in the market, in our societies, in our communities right now. We also need to skill up. We need, in Africa, we talk about our youth being our dividend. By 2050, the largest youth population, but we're not training them, we're not educating them in green technologies, let alone in some basic literacy. So they need to also be skilled up so they can contribute and they can bring locally relevant solutions to the table. So I do see technology playing a huge role. I do see that as we advance from the basics, that AI will play a huge role, because there's a significant volume of data that needs to be analyzed and that needs to be synthesized to enable the person on the ground to make the right decisions at the right time.
Heather, did you want to?
The key thing with AI and any other technology is it's a question of power. Who owns the technology, who controls it, who owns the data, and does the user, that end user on the ground, on a farm, in the field, do they have the say in what gets designed and what serves them?
The likelihood is no.
Well, not completely, because, I mean, some of the solutions that we're working with, the farmer and the person on the ground is at the center of the design of those solutions. And it will not start, which goes back to my point about skilling up and education in the technical skills, because the solutions are still being brought in from outside, and we're not participating in the ownership of those technologies. So, but it does still need to happen. We need technology to leapfrog the fact that we have farmers being able to price discover and also be able to plan better with weather solutions, I think is important and very relevant.
I agree.
Okay, unfortunately we have to leave it there. I was going to ask one more question, but Meg, do we have any questions? No, okay. We're going to have to leave it there. Jennifer, Meher, Heather, Tokunboh, thank you so much, and thank you everyone.
Thank you.